The air in the sanctum sanctorum crackled, thick with the scent of petrified blood and ozone. Lord Valerius, king of the obsidian throne, eternal sovereign of the Carpathian Vale, stood at the heart of the arcane circle. Millennia of power coiled within him, a serpent of shadow and starlight. His long black coat, woven from the essence of a captured knight, stirred in a wind that wasn't there. For 1,000 years he had been preparing for this, the ritual of soul tethering. Not a crude possession, but a symbiotic binding that would grant him access to the raw, untamed potential of a specific mortal bloodline, a lineage prophesied to hold the key to absolute power. Tonight, the final heir, a woman named Emma Collins, slept in her distant, unremarkable apartment. Her soul, the prophecy foretold, was a crucible of immense, latent power, a tempest of untapped psychic energy. He would enter her mind, find the core of her deepest, most forbidden desires, and anchor his own essence to that dark, formidable core. With their souls entwined, he would be unstoppable. He raised his hands, alabaster pale in the gloom, and began the incantation. The Latin was ancient, predating the rise of Rome, each syllable a chisel against the walls of reality. The runes on the floor blazed with violet fire. His consciousness stretched, a shadowy tendril slithering across oceans and continents, guided by the thrum of her unique bloodline. He felt the flimsy barrier of her mortal mind, a pathetic defense against a being who had conversed with dead gods. With a final, guttural word of power, he pushed through. He expected darkness. He expected a maelstrom of repressed rage, a gallery of secret lusts, a labyrinth of delicious mortal sins. He was prepared for a battle of wills, a psychic war against a formidable, albeit ignorant, human spirit. What he got was a spreadsheet. The impact was not one of psychic force, but of sheer, unadulterated administrative dread. It slammed into his ancient consciousness with the force of a physical blow. Valerius, who had stared into the void and seen it blink, recoiled. Okay, so if I put $50 extra toward the principal this month, that shaves off 7 months over 30 years? God, that's depressing. But if I don't, the interest capitalization on loan group B is going to crucify me in May. Maybe I can skip buying fresh vegetables this week. Canned beans have vitamins, right? Sort of? Valerius felt a wave of nausea, a sensation he hadn't experienced since the 14th century. What was this interest capitalization? It sounded like a vile curse, a soul-flaying hex devised by a particularly sadistic warlock. He tried to push deeper, searching for the promised abyss of her soul. Instead, he was assaulted by a different kind of horror. Reminder, call about the dental insurance pre-authorization. Why isn't a crown a preventative procedure? My tooth is literally crumbling. It's preventing a bigger hole in my face. That seems pretty preventative to me. Ugh, I'll be on hold for an hour. Maybe I'll do it during the marketing meeting. No one will notice. He staggered back in his own mind, the tendril of his consciousness vibrating with a frantic, buzzing energy. It was a chaotic symphony of mundane terror, a list of grocery items, each one a tiny battle in a war of budgets. Can I afford the organic milk? No, the regular one is fine. But what if it's full of hormones? Am I giving myself future cancer for a savings of $1.50? He tried to find the core of her desires, the seat of her power. He found a tangled knot of anxiety about her car's check engine light. He sought her deepest fears. He found a paralyzing dread of her landlord, a balding man named Gary who always smelled faintly of sour cream. Did I remember to move the car for street cleaning? Oh God, please tell me I remembered. That's a $70 ticket. $70 is my entire grocery budget for next week. I'll have to live on ramen and despair. Again. Valerius felt a genuine cold spike of fear, not for himself, but for this spectral $70 penalty that apparently held the power of starvation. This was not the grand operatic sin he had anticipated. This was a death by 1,000 paper cuts. He was drowning in a sea of trivial, yet overwhelmingly potent stress. He tried to assert his dominance, to project his millennia of terrifying power into her psyche. His projection of an obsidian throne room filled with shrieking souls was instantly overwritten by a vivid mental image of a 401k contribution summary, its meager numbers radiating an aura of profound disappointment. I should be putting in more. Dave from accounting puts in 10%. 10! He's probably going to retire at 60 and travel. I'm going to die at my desk while trying to figure out how to unjam the printer. The psychic feedback loop was excruciating. Her anxiety was a tangible force, a high-frequency shriek that vibrated through his very essence. It wasn't the noble, tragic suffering of a tortured artist or a fallen queen. It was the frantic hamster wheel panic of modern existence. It had no narrative, no grandeur. It was just relentless. The ritual began to collapse. The arcane energies, meant to latch onto a core of powerful dark emotion, found nothing to grip. Her mind wasn't a solid foundation of sin and desire. It was a swamp of shifting, overlapping worries. The tether, unable to anchor, whipped around wildly, snagging on the strongest ambient emotion it could find, a deep, abiding terror related to something called a health insurance deductible. With a final agonized gasp, the spell shattered. Valerius was violently thrown back into his own body. He collapsed to one knee on the cold stone of the sanctum, gasping for air he didn't need. The violet runes flickered and died. The ritual was a catastrophic failure. But something was wrong. A thin, silvery thread of energy now connected him to her. The tether hadn't anchored, but it hadn't fully severed either. It was stuck. And through it, a faint but persistent hum of anxiety trickled into his mind. Ugh, what was that? Weirdest dream ever. Something about Dracula having a panic attack over my Roth IRA. I really need to stop eating cheese before bed. Valerius clutched his head. He could still hear her. He was psychically shackled to a mortal woman whose soul was too fraught with financial anxiety for dark magic to penetrate. For the first time in over 2,000 years, the eternal sovereign of the Carpathian Vale was utterly, completely, and profoundly baffled. Conquering the legions of the damned had been less complicated than this. Valerius furiously flipped through the ritual tome the next day, finding a footnote in tiny script at the bottom of page 437. Note: ritual requires subject to possess at least one stable emotional anchor point. In cases of extreme psychological fragmentation or anxiety-based defense mechanisms, tether may enter error state, refusing to disconnect but unable to properly integrate. See Appendix 12 for troubleshooting. There was no Appendix 12. The page had been eaten by moths in 1673. He slammed the book shut with enough force to crack the stone table beneath it. For 3 days, Valerius did not move from his throne. He sat in brooding silence, the thin, persistent trickle of Emma's anxieties a constant, maddening hum in the back of his ancient mind. It was like listening to a beehive made of spreadsheets and dread. Tuesday meeting, presentation due. Crap, I haven't even started the PowerPoint. I'll just use the old template. Will Brenda notice? Brenda notices everything. She has hawk eyes for font inconsistencies. He had experienced the minds of kings and prophets, of madmen and saints. He had felt their lust for power, their terror of oblivion, their ecstatic visions. Emma's mind was a landscape he could not comprehend. He felt her spike of adrenaline when an email from her boss arrived. He experienced the dull, throbbing headache of staring at a computer screen for 8 hours. He felt the profound, soul-deep satisfaction of finding a parking spot right in front of her building. The most potent and terrifying of all her anxieties, however, was the looming, monstrous entity she called her student loans. It was a constant, oppressive weight in her thoughts, a shadowy beast that devoured a significant portion of her monthly income. He felt her ritualistic dread every time she opened the payment portal, the way her stomach clenched as she watched her balance barely decrease. This could not stand. Not because he cared for her well-being, that was a ridiculous notion, but because her incessant financial panic was giving him the psychic equivalent of a migraine. It was an affront to his dignity. He, a king of shadows, was being tormented by the U.S. Department of Education. He summoned his chief financial familiar, a centuries-old ghoul, named Alistair, who handled the vast, sprawling wealth Valerius had accumulated over millennia. Alistair manifested in a swirl of dust and deference, his abacus-like fingers clicking nervously. "My Lord Valerius, you summoned me?" "Alistair," Valerius began, his voice a low rumble. "I have a logistical problem." He could not explain the true nature of his predicament. "There is a mortal. I require a complete and utter annihilation of her debt." Alistair's misty eyes widened slightly. "Annihilation, my lord? As in, a transfer of assets?" "Precisely. Find the source of this Sally May, this Navient, and vanquish them. Pay them whatever they demand. Use the Medici gold. Use the Spanish Armada treasure. I do not care. I want this burden lifted from her. And, more importantly, from his own consciousness." Alistair bowed low. "It will be complex, my lord. Modern mortal finance is a labyrinth of firewalls and routing numbers. They do not accept payment in doubloons." "Then learn their ways," Valerius snapped, a flicker of red in his eyes. "You have served me for 5 centuries. You deciphered the Atlantean tax codes. You can surely handle this. Be discreet, anonymous. I want no trace leading back to me." The process, as it turned out, was a nightmare. 3 weeks later, Alistair materialized in a cloud of existential dread, clutching a laptop like it was a cursed artifact. "My lord, I have successfully navigated the mortal banking system. However, I must report that I am now receiving 17 emails per day about hot crypto opportunities and something called a credit score. I do not understand what I have done to deserve this punishment." Valerius regarded his familiar with something approaching sympathy. "You have my deepest condolences." "I had to call a helpline, my lord. I was on hold for 47 minutes. I am 500 years old. I once negotiated with the Medici during a plague, but this Karen in customer service defeated me with the phrase, 'Let me speak to your supervisor.'" Alistair's voice trembled with genuine trauma. There was no supervisor. It was a lie, a cruel, bureaucratic lie. "You are the strongest of us all, Alistair," Valerius said solemnly. "Your sacrifice will not be forgotten." Through his tether to Emma, Valerius felt her own confusion when she received a flurry of bizarre emails from her loan servicers. "Your loan has been paid in full." What is this, a phishing scam? A cruel joke? If I click this, is it going to install a virus that steals my remaining $12? Then came the official letter, on thick, watermarked paper. She opened it with trembling hands, her skepticism warring with a desperate, wild hope. Valerius felt the moment her brain finally processed the information. The balance, $0.00. Her mind went completely, blissfully silent. For a full 30 seconds, there was nothing. No spreadsheets, no budget worries, no dental insurance anxieties. Just a profound, echoing silence of pure, unadulterated shock. It was the most peaceful moment Valerius had experienced in weeks. He found himself basking in it, a drowning man finally reaching the surface. Then the silence was shattered by a tidal wave of pure, unbridled joy, so potent it made him dizzy. It was a feeling cleaner and brighter than any he had ever encountered. It was followed swiftly by a new, more intense strain of anxiety. Who did this? Why? Is this a mistake? Are they going to ask for it back? Is this some kind of elaborate prank? Maybe it was that Nigerian prince who keeps emailing me. Did he finally come through? No, that's insane. Is the government just forgiving loans now? No, that's even more insane. This makes no sense. Who has $94,000 to just give away? Her suspicion was a frantic, paranoid spiral. Valerius sighed. It seemed he had only traded one form of mental noise for another. But this new noise was intriguing. It was a mystery she was trying to solve, and he was the answer. He decided it was time to observe his subject in person. Finding her was trivial. He was a master of shadow and subtlety. He located the coffee shop she frequented every morning, a noisy, brightly lit place that smelled of burnt beans and steamed milk. He watched from an alcove across the street as she approached, clutching a travel mug. She looked ordinary. Brown hair pulled back in a messy bun, a practical coat, and an expression of deep, focused thought as she navigated the crowded sidewalk. Yet, inside her mind, a frantic debate was raging. Okay, I can afford a real latte today, a fancy one, with oat milk. Or should I save the money? Just because the loans are gone doesn't mean I should be reckless. But it's a celebration. A celebration of what? A mysterious financial miracle that's probably a clerical error? I'll just get a regular coffee. Black. Valerius found it fascinating. He, who could decide the fate of nations with a single command, was captivated by immortal's internal struggle over a $4 beverage. He allowed himself to step from the shadows, timing his entrance to the coffee shop to coincide with hers. He wore a simple, tailored black suit, a concession to modern attire, though it felt like a costume. The automatic door chimed, and he stepped inside, the chaotic energy of the place washing over him. Emma was at the counter, and he could hear her mental rehearsal. Don't say latte, don't say latte, don't say latte. Can I just get a large dark roast, please? She said to the barista. Valerius stepped up beside her. His voice, when he spoke, was a low, quiet counterpoint to the cafe's din. And for me, he said, his gaze fixed on Emma, I will have whatever this establishment's most celebratory concoction might be. For the lady as well, my treat. Emma turned, startled. She saw a man who seemed entirely out of place. He was tall and impossibly pale, with eyes the color of a midnight sky just before a storm. His stillness was what was most unnerving. In the swirling chaos of the morning rush, he was a point of absolute calm. Whoa, okay. Hello, handsome, vaguely menacing stranger. Is this how people get kidnapped? By being offered a fancy coffee? Probably. Oh, no, that's okay, she said out loud, forcing a polite smile. I'm fine, really. Nonsense, Valerius said, his lips curving in a faint, unpracticed smile. A significant burden has been lifted from your shoulders, has it not? Such an occasion warrants a small extravagance. A caramel macchiato, perhaps? Emma's polite smile froze. Her blood ran cold. The mental chatter ceased, replaced by a single, blaring alarm bell. How does he know that? Valerius felt her sudden, sharp spike of fear and suspicion. He had miscalculated. He had been too direct, his knowledge too specific. He was used to subjects who were terrified of him by default. This required a different approach. Subtlety. Forgive my forwardness, he said smoothly, his tone shifting to one of charming, eccentric warmth. I am a benefactor of a sort. I oversee a small philanthropic fund dedicated to alleviating educational debt for promising individuals. Your name was selected from a list. The payment was an anonymous gift from our foundation. I merely happened to recognize you from your file. It was a clumsy lie, woven from half-truths he'd gleaned from Alistair's frantic research into mortal charities. But to a human unfamiliar with the machinations of ancient vampires, it sounded plausible. Almost. Emma stared at him, her brow furrowed. He could feel her mind racing, scrutinizing his story, looking for holes. Philanthropic fund? Selected from a list? That sounds like something from a movie, but it would explain everything. Still, this guy feels off, in a very well-dressed, ridiculously good-looking way. My file? She asked, her voice cautious. A brief biography. We believe in understanding the people we assist, he improvised, the lie growing more elaborate. It mentioned your preference for this particular cafe. Another fabrication, but a necessary one. The barista, a teenager with green hair and a bored expression, broke the tense silence. So, like a large dark roast and 2 caramel macchiatos with extra drizzle? Emma finally broke eye contact with Valerius, giving a hesitant nod. Sure. Yes. Thank you. Valerius paid with a sleek black credit card that Alistair had procured for him, a device he found both fascinating and absurdly fragile. They waited for their drinks in an awkward silence, the hiss of the espresso machine filling the void. Emma kept stealing glances at him, her mind a whirlwind of suspicion and reluctant gratitude. This is the weirdest day of my life. My debt is gone, and now a gothic billionaire who looks like he just stepped out of an Anne Rice novel is buying me coffee. Should I be running? Or asking him for stock tips? He found himself strangely amused. Her anxieties were so practical. When their names were called, he retrieved the drinks and gestured toward a small table in the corner. Would you permit me a few moments of your time, Miss Collins? I find your world to be endlessly fascinating. Against her better judgment, she agreed, partly because she was too stunned to refuse, and partly because a tiny, reckless part of her was intensely curious. She sat down opposite him, wrapping her hands around the warm cup. So, she began, taking a sip of the sweet, frothy coffee. It was delicious. My world is fascinating? I work in marketing for a company that sells ergonomic office chairs. My life is the opposite of fascinating. On the contrary, Valerius said, leaning forward slightly. He hadn't touched his own drink. I am intrigued by the challenges you face, the sheer complexity of your existence. Tell me, this PowerPoint presentation you are constructing, what is its purpose? Emma blinked. My PowerPoint? She hadn't mentioned that to anyone. The alarm bells in her head started ringing again, louder this time. Okay, this has gone from weird to creepy. How does he know about the presentation for Brenda? Is he a stalker? A very rich, very polite stalker? He saw the panic in her eyes and backpedaled quickly. An educated guess, he said with a disarming smile. In my field, we often deal with reports and projections. I assumed a professional like yourself would be engaged in similar work. She relaxed, but only slightly. Right. Well, it's a quarterly review. I have to present market analytics to our regional sales team. It's about as exciting as it sounds. She took another sip of coffee, emboldened by the sugar and caffeine. What about you? What exactly is your field? Valerius considered the question. His field was eternal dominion over the creatures of the night and the slow, patient accumulation of power and wealth over 30 centuries. Asset management, he said simply, on a generational scale. It wasn't technically a lie. She laughed, a genuine, startlingly pleasant sound. So you're rich. I kind of figured that out when you paid off my student loans. Wealth is a tool, he replied, finding her directness refreshing. Its only value is in its application. In your case, it was applied to remove an obstacle. An obstacle? She repeated, a wry smile playing on her lips. That's a polite way of putting it. It was more like a soul-crushing mountain of despair that haunted my every waking moment. But obstacle works too. He felt a strange pang at her words. He had sought to anchor himself to her grand desires, but it was her despair he had found. He had intended to use her, to drain her potential for his own gain. Instead, he had become the anonymous agent of her relief. The irony was not lost on him. "This relief," he asked, his curiosity genuine. "Describe it to me." Emma leaned back in her chair, a thoughtful expression on her face. The frantic, buzzing anxiety in her mind had softened into a low, steady hum of cautious contentment. "It's quiet," she said, struggling to find the words. "For the past 10 years, there's been this little voice in the back of my head, constantly doing math, calculating interest, worrying about payments, wondering if I'll ever own a house or be able to afford to have a kid. And now, it's just quiet. It's weird. I feel like I have all this extra space in my brain." He understood completely. He was experiencing that quiet right along with her, and it was intoxicating. For the first time, he felt a flicker of something other than detached fascination. A strange, unfamiliar warmth. He wanted to preserve this quiet. He wanted to protect it. "I am glad," he said, and was surprised to find that he meant it. "Your peace of mind is a worthy investment." She looked at him then, truly looked at him, past the strange formality and the unnerving intensity. She saw a man who, for whatever bizarre reason, seemed to genuinely care about the anxieties of a stranger. Her internal monologue, for once, was in agreement with her spoken words. Okay, he's still super weird. But maybe he's a good kind of weird. "Well, Mr." she trailed off, realizing she didn't even know his name. "Valerius," he supplied. "Just Valerius." "Well, Valerius," she said, a real smile finally reaching her eyes. "Thank you. You have no idea what this means to me." Oh, but he did. He had a more intimate, direct understanding of what it meant than she could possibly imagine. And as he sat there, in that offensively bright cafe, he realized with a dawning sense of horror and fascination that he wanted to know more. He wanted to understand the ergonomic office chairs, the terror of Brenda from marketing, the subtle joy of finding a good parking spot. He, the eternal sovereign, was becoming willingly entangled in the beautifully, terrifyingly mundane world of Emma Collins. Their meetings became a strange, unspoken routine. Valerius, under the guise of his philanthropic curiosity, would appear at her coffee shop or near her office building during her lunch break. He was always impeccably dressed, a stark figure of old-world elegance against the drab backdrop of her corporate life. And Emma, despite every rational instinct telling her this was bizarre, found herself looking forward to their encounters. He was the strangest person she had ever met. He asked endless questions about the minutiae of her life, with an intensity she found both baffling and flattering. "Explain this concept of a commute to me again," he'd say. His dark eyes narrowed in concentration as they sat on a park bench. "You willingly encase yourself in a metal box, only to sit motionless for an hour, surrounded by other equally trapped mortals, simply to arrive at a place you do not wish to be?" "That's a pretty bleak way of putting it," Emma would laugh. "But yeah, that's the gist. It's how you get to work." And this work, he'd press on, it consists of creating documents to persuade other mortals to purchase lumbar support? You make it sound so pointless. "I am merely trying to understand the structure of your suffering," he would state with perfect seriousness. The tether between them remained, a subtle psychic link that gave Valerius a constant, low-level feed of her emotional state. He learned to differentiate the sharp, jagged anxiety of an impending deadline from the dull, persistent worry about a weird noise her refrigerator was making. He also experienced her moments of simple pleasure, the taste of her favorite ice cream, the satisfaction of finishing a crossword puzzle, the warmth of a phone call with her sister. He, in turn, began to orchestrate solutions to her smaller problems, always anonymously. The landlord, Gary, who had been refusing to fix her leaky faucet for months, suddenly had a change of heart after a visit from a very pale, very persuasive building inspector in the middle of the night. Her ancient laptop, which was prone to crashing at the worst possible moments, was replaced by a mysterious delivery of a top-of-the-line model, with a note that simply read, "From a well-wisher." Emma grew increasingly suspicious, but also undeniably grateful. Her life was becoming easier. The constant, grinding stress that had been her companion for years was slowly being sanded away, replaced by a sense of stability she had never known. And the only new variable in her life was Valerius. One evening, he invited her to his home for dinner. A simple meal, he had said, an invitation that Emma's mind immediately translated into a series of frantic questions. What do I wear? What do you bring as a gift to a reclusive Gothic billionaire? A bottle of wine? What if he only drinks, the red stuff? No, stop it. That's ridiculous. He's just a weird rich guy. A weird rich guy who lives in that creepy old mansion on the hill that everyone says is haunted. The creepy old mansion was an understatement. It was a full-blown Gothic castle, complete with gargoyles and a wrought iron gate that swung open silently as her rideshare pulled up. Valerius was waiting for her at the massive oak doors, dressed not in a suit, but in a flowing black shirt and trousers that seemed to enhance his otherworldly aura. "Welcome to my home, Emma," he said, his voice echoing slightly in the cavernous, marble-floored foyer. "Wow," she breathed, looking up at the vaulted ceilings and shadowy archways. "Very Bram Stoker chic. Did you get a deal on gargoyles?" He didn't react to her sarcasm, merely guiding her through a long, portrait-lined hallway. The eyes of his ancestors, stern, pale figures in archaic clothing, seemed to follow her. Okay, definitely not just a weird rich guy. This is old, old money. Or he's a very successful historical reenactor. The dining room was dominated by a long, dark wood table set for two. A fire roared in a fireplace large enough to stand in. The simple meal was a multi-course affair served by a silent, unnervingly swift servant who seemed to glide rather than walk. "Your home is a lot," Emma said, trying to sound casual as she took a delicate bite of something that tasted divine. "It has been in my family for some time," Valerius replied, watching her intently. "Which family? The Addams family?" she quipped, then immediately regretted it. Too sarcastic? He's going to think I'm ungrateful. But through the tether, he felt her nervousness, the social anxiety warring with her natural wit. He found it endearing. "A distant branch, perhaps," he said, allowing a rare, genuine smile to touch his lips. The conversation flowed more easily than she expected. He asked her about her dreams, not her career ambitions, but her actual dreams. She told him about her childhood, her desire to travel, her fear of disappointing the people she loved. He listened with an unwavering focus that made her feel like the most important person in the world. "And what about you?" she asked finally. "You know all my boring secrets. Tell me one of yours." Valerius paused, the wine in his glass a swirl of deep crimson. He had countless secrets, any one of which would shatter her perception of reality. He chose a simple, yet profound, truth. "I am lonely," he said, the words feeling heavy and strange on his tongue. He hadn't admitted it even to himself for centuries. "My world is one of stasis, of repetition. You are the first truly new thing to happen to me in a very long time." The honesty of his confession caught her off guard. She saw past the imposing figure and the ancient castle, and saw a flicker of vulnerability in his dark eyes. It was a loneliness she recognized. In her own way, surrounded by people but drowning in her own anxieties, she had been lonely too. He's just a man, her mind supplied, a thought that felt both comforting and completely wrong. A very old, very strange, very lonely man. Well, she said softly, for what it's worth, you're the first ancient, mysterious billionaire to randomly pay off my debt and take an interest in my lumbar support marketing PowerPoints. So I guess we're even. He felt the warmth of her sentiment through their connection, a gentle wave washing over the cold shores of his soul. He was beginning to understand that the power he had sought from her was not some grand, cosmic force. It was this warmth, this wit, this chaotic, resilient, human spirit. Later, he showed her his library. It was a breathtaking, 2-story rotunda filled with thousands of books, from ancient scrolls to modern paperbacks. "You've read all of these?" she asked in awe, running her fingers along the leather-bound spines. "Most of them," he confirmed. "Time is the one resource I have in abundance." She pulled out a worn copy of a favorite fantasy novel from her childhood. "What about this one?" "3 times," he said. "The world building is derivative, but the protagonist's emotional arc is surprisingly compelling." She laughed and put the book back. As she turned, she stumbled slightly on the edge of a rug. Valerius moved with impossible speed, his hands steadying her by the arms before she could fall. His touch was cool, but a strange energy seemed to hum beneath his skin. For a moment, they stood there, inches apart. The air grew thick with unspoken things. He could feel her heart begin to beat faster, a frantic, wonderful rhythm in the quiet of the library. He saw the flicker of confusion and curiosity in her eyes. "His eyes are incredible. I could get lost in them. This is crazy. I'm in a castle with a man I barely know, and I think I want him to kiss me." He had seen empires rise and fall. He had commanded armies of the night. He had communed with forces beyond mortal comprehension, but the simple, terrifying, exhilarating thought of leaning down and kissing her felt like the most significant act of his entire existence. He fought the impulse. It was too soon. She did not know what he was. The truth lay between them like a chasm. He released her gently, stepping back. "You should be careful," he said, his voice a low murmur. "The floors are uneven." But as he watched her regain her composure, a blush rising on her cheeks, he knew that it was he who was in danger. He had come to conquer her soul, and now he was terrified he was about to lose his own. The crisis arrived, as they often do, without warning. It came not from the mortal world, but from Valerius's own. A rival, a brutish vampire lord from the frozen north named Malachor, had sensed the fluctuation in Valerius's power caused by the failed ritual. Seeing it as a sign of weakness, he made a direct challenge for the obsidian throne. Valerius was forced to withdraw, to engage in the ancient, bloody politics of his kind. He disappeared from Emma's life for 2 weeks without a word. For her, it was a confusing and hurtful silence. For Valerius, it was hell. He was in the middle of a tense negotiation with his council, a grim assembly of ancient vampires, when a wave of pure, unadulterated panic washed over him from the tether. It was stronger than anything he had felt from her before. Oh God, no. No, 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 no. Not now. He felt her racing heart, her shortness of breath. He saw through her eyes the flashing red and blue lights in her rearview mirror. A police siren wailed. "Expired registration. I forgot to renew it. I had the money and I just forgot. How could I be so stupid? He's going to give me a ticket. How much is a ticket for expired registration? It's probably hundreds of dollars, and my insurance might go up. This is a disaster." Valerius stood up so abruptly from his throne that the stone groaned in protest. The council fell silent. Malachor, who had been mid-rant about territorial boundaries, stopped with his mouth hanging open. "My apologies, my lords," Valerius said, his voice tight with a strange urgency. "A matter of grave importance requires my immediate attention." You dare, Malachor began. Yes, Valerius interrupted, already dissolving at the edges. I dare. Leaving his stunned council and the fuming Malachor behind, he dissolved into a swarm of bats and shot into the night sky, driven by an instinct more powerful than any lust for power, the overwhelming need to mitigate Emma's anxiety about a traffic violation. He found her on the side of a busy road, her car pulled over. A police officer was walking toward her window. Valerius materialized in the shadows of a nearby alley, his mind racing. He could not reveal himself, but he could not stand by and let her suffer this terror. He focused his will, a subtle, psychic suggestion whispered on the wind. It wasn't mind control, merely a nudge, requiring tremendous concentration and only effective if the impulse was already present in the officer's mind. Be lenient. She seems nice. It's just a simple mistake. The officer tapped on her window. Emma rolled it down, her hands trembling. Is there a problem, officer? Valerius felt her bracing for the worst. The officer peered at her license, then at the sticker on her plate. Ma'am, your registration is expired. I know, she whispered, her voice thick with unshed tears. I'm so sorry. I forgot. The officer looked at her for a long moment. Valerius held his breath, maintaining the delicate suggestion. Look, the officer said with a sigh. It's been a long night. I'll let you go with a warning. But you get this taken care of first thing tomorrow morning, you hear me? The wave of relief from Emma was so powerful it almost buckled Valerius's knees. It was more potent than any victory he had ever achieved on the battlefield. She thanked the officer profusely, her voice choked with gratitude. As she drove away, her mind slowly calming, Valerius knew he couldn't keep his two worlds separate any longer. The tether was not just a nuisance or a curiosity, it was a bond. Her pain was his pain, her relief was his relief. Hiding the truth was no longer an option. It was a liability, and worse, it was a betrayal of the strange, sincere connection that had grown between them. When Valerius returned to the council chamber 3 hours later, Emma's registration crisis fully resolved and her anxiety reduced to manageable levels, he found Malachor still there, now pacing furiously before the assembled vampires. You dare leave in the middle of, Malachor roared as Valerius rematerialized on his throne. I just orchestrated a complex psychic intervention across 200 miles to prevent a $70 parking violation, Valerius interrupted, his voice cold and steady. I have spent 2 weeks experiencing the horror of quarterly earnings reports and health insurance portals. I have stared into an abyss far more terrifying than anything in your frozen wasteland. The council members shifted uncomfortably. They'd heard rumors about Valerius's strange behavior, whispers of a failed ritual and an unusual preoccupation with mortal concerns. So here is my offer, Malachor, Valerius continued, leaning forward on his throne with predatory intensity. Challenge me, and I will make you experience 1 full month in the mind of a millennial with a 401k she can't afford to contribute to properly and a suspicion that her company is about to downsize. You will feel every moment of spreadsheet-based terror, every penny of compounding interest anxiety, every soul-crushing interaction with automated customer service systems. Malachor paled visibly. Even for a vampire who had committed atrocities across 3 centuries, there were limits. The other council members looked genuinely disturbed. I withdraw my challenge, Malachor said, his voice barely above a whisper. A wise decision, said Claudius, one of the eldest council members, speaking quickly. All in favor of never speaking of this incident again and considering Lord Valerius's position secure? The vote was unanimous. Valerius nodded curtly and dismissed them all. He had more important matters to attend to. He appeared at Emma's apartment door later that night. When she opened it, she gasped. He looked different. His usual calm was gone, replaced by a deep weariness. There were shadows under his eyes that had nothing to do with the lighting. "Valerius, what happened? Where have you been?" she asked, her voice a mixture of relief and hurt. "May I come in, Emma?" he asked. His tone was grave. "There is something I must tell you. The truth. All of it." She led him inside, her heart pounding with a sense of foreboding. They sat on her slightly lumpy sofa, the familiar comfort of her small living room, a stark contrast to the tension radiating from him. He began to speak, his voice low and steady. He told her everything. He started not with vampirism, but with the ritual. "I sought you out, Emma, not for companionship, but for power," he confessed, his gaze fixed on his hands, unable to meet her eyes. "There was a prophecy concerning your bloodline. I performed a ritual to bind my soul to yours, to harness your latent potential for my own ends." He felt her mind go still, the usual hum of thoughts ceasing entirely. It was the silence of shock. "The ritual required an anchor," he continued, forcing himself to go on. "It was designed to latch onto the darkest, most powerful desires and emotions in your soul. I expected to find a maelstrom of ambition or rage or forbidden lust, a core of great, terrible power." He finally looked up at her. Her face was pale, her expression unreadable. "But I found none of that. When I entered your mind, I was repelled. The spell failed. It collapsed because it could find no anchor." He took a deep, unnecessary breath. "My dark magic, Emma, was thwarted by your overwhelming anxiety about your student loan debt." He braced himself for her reaction. Fear, revulsion, anger. He was prepared for any of it. He was not prepared for the sound that came out of her mouth. It started as a small choked gasp, then grew into a snort, and then erupted into a full, unrestrained peal of laughter. She threw her head back and laughed, tears streaming down her face. It wasn't a hysterical laugh. It was a laugh of pure, unadulterated, cathartic absurdity. Valerius stared at her, utterly nonplussed. "You are laughing?" My financial anxiety," she gasped between fits of laughter, "was a magical defense system? My worrying about interest capitalization acted like a psychic shield?" "In essence," he said, his bafflement growing. "Yes." She laughed even harder, clutching her stomach. "Oh my God! All those years, I thought my anxiety was my biggest weakness, my most shameful secret. But it turns out it's a superpower. It's an anti-vampire possession force field." The tension in the room shattered. Her laughter was a cleansing fire, burning away his shame and her shock, leaving only the ridiculous, wonderful truth of their situation. He felt her joy, her relief, through the tether. The profound, validating realization that the very thing that had tormented her had also, in its own way, protected her. When her laughter finally subsided into breathless giggles, she wiped her eyes and looked at him. The fear was gone, replaced by a look of wonder. "So, that's how you knew about the PowerPoint," she said, shaking her head in disbelief. "You've been in my head this whole time?" "Not in it," he corrected gently. "Tethered to it. I experience your emotions, your surface thoughts, the constant hum of your concerns." "The constant hum of my concerns," she repeated, a wide smile spreading across her face. "You poor, poor man. You tried to conquer my soul and got stuck with my grocery list and my car insurance renewal reminders." "It has been an education," he admitted, a faint smile touching his own lips. He felt the last of his tension drain away. She wasn't afraid. She wasn't angry. She understood in a way no one else possibly could. "So," she said, her expression turning thoughtful, "the paying off my loans, the laptop, my landlord suddenly becoming helpful. That was all you? Trying to, what? Quiet the noise?" "I sought to alleviate your distress," he said simply. Your peace became important to me. Important, she repeated softly, and he felt a warm wave of emotion from her through the tether. Then her expression shifted, becoming more serious. And the whole "I'm a vampire" thing. Is that part of the story too? He nodded slowly. That is the other part of the truth. I am what you would call a vampire. I am ancient, and my world is complicated. He told her about Malachor, about the council, about the reason for his 2-week absence, and his rather unconventional method of maintaining his throne. She listened patiently, her expression cycling through disbelief, fascination, and occasional bursts of incredulous laughter, especially when he described threatening Malachor with millennial financial anxiety. When he was finished, she was quiet for a long time. The only sound was the hum of her refrigerator, a sound he was now intimately familiar with. So, to recap, she said finally, ticking the points off on her fingers. You're an ancient vampire king. You tried to perform a dark ritual to steal my soul power, but it failed because my brain is a dumpster fire of financial anxiety. As a result, you're now psychically stuck with me, and you've been secretly fixing all my life's problems to get some peace and quiet. And you just threatened a rival vampire lord by offering to make him experience my economic dread. Is that about right? An unorthodox summary, Valerius conceded, but accurate. She looked at him for a long moment, and her smile was soft and genuine. You know, for a terrifying creature of the night who tried to magically enslave me, you're actually the kindest, most considerate person I've ever met. His unbeating heart ached with an emotion so powerful it almost overwhelmed him. It was tenderness. It was fondness. It was a profound connection he had never imagined possible. Then Emma's expression shifted again, a question forming. Wait, can't you just undo it? The tether? Valerius had anticipated this question. I consulted with a witch in Prague, he said. She laughed for 10 minutes straight, then said, A vampire tried to anchor to student loan debt? The spell probably thinks it's latched onto a demon. Good luck. Apparently, the ritual interprets your financial anxiety as an ancient, eldritch entity. It won't release until the threat is neutralized. So you're stuck with me until, what, the heat death of the universe? Or until modern capitalism collapses, he said with perfect seriousness. I am not optimistic about my chances. She laughed again, but it was gentler this time. Then she asked the question that had been building in her mind. Earlier, when I got pulled over, that cop was going to give me a ticket. I could feel it. Then he just changed his mind. That was you, wasn't it? Valerius looked uncomfortable for the first time that evening. Yes, I used a form of psychic suggestion. It's not mind control, he added quickly, seeing her expression. I cannot compel actions, only suggest moods, make someone slightly more inclined toward mercy. It requires tremendous focus and only works if the impulse is already present in their mind. Have you ever used it on me? The question was direct, and he felt her sudden spike of concern through the tether. No, he said firmly. The tether makes it impossible. I'd essentially be arguing with myself. Your mind is far too loud for subtle manipulation. Suggesting calm to you would be like whispering at a rock concert. She snorted. That's weirdly reassuring and insulting at the same time. I contain multitudes, he said with a slight smile. Emma sat back against the couch, processing everything. Valerius could feel the whirlwind of her thoughts through the tether. She was actually constructing a mental spreadsheet, weighing pros and cons. It was so fundamentally Emma that he felt a surge of affection. Emma, he said finally, his voice barely a whisper. He reached out, his cool fingers gently brushing a remaining tear of laughter from her cheek. My world is dangerous. It is filled with conflict and darkness. But it is also a world without deductibles, without landlords, without the fear that a single medical emergency could lead to ruin. He held her gaze, laying his soul bare. I failed to take your power, so now I offer you mine. All of it, the security of my wealth, the safety of my strength, an eternity, if you would have it, free from the anxieties that have plagued you. He paused, his vulnerability absolute. I began this seeking a tether to your power. I now find I simply want a tether to you. Emma looked at the ancient, powerful being before her, the man who had heard her every frantic, mundane thought and had not fled, but had instead stayed and tried to help. He had seen the messiest, most anxious parts of her mind and had called her world fascinating. He offered her not just an escape from her worries, but a partnership with the one person in existence who truly, fundamentally, understood them. Okay, wait, she said, holding up a hand. Let's talk logistics. This eternity thing, how does that work? Do you bite me? Is there a ceremony? Do I have to drink blood immediately, or… We have time, Valerius said gently. Years, if you wish. The process is irreversible, so I would prefer you be certain. What if I want to wait until after my dental work is done? Emma asked seriously. I assume vampire teeth don't get cavities, but I'm not wasting this crown opportunity. I've been fighting with insurance for months. That is extremely practical, Valerius said, something between admiration and amusement in his voice. Also, Emma continued, warming to the topic, I have a 401k that's finally starting to look decent after your intervention. Can I cash that out penalty-free if I'm technically dead? Is there a tax form for that? I will have Alistair research it, Valerius promised. He has unfortunately become quite knowledgeable about modern financial systems. Emma smiled, but then her expression turned serious again. You're really offering me everything, just like that. Not just like that, he corrected softly. I am offering you everything because you are everything. Because in 2,000 years of existence, I have never met anyone who could transform my attempt at conquest into a partnership. Because your anxiety about parking tickets has somehow become the most important thing in my universe. Because when you laugh, I feel something I thought I'd forgotten how to feel. The quiet she had felt when her loans were paid off was nothing compared to the profound peace that settled over her now. It was the end of a long, frantic battle she had been fighting alone for years. She leaned forward, closing the distance between them, and she kissed him. His lips were cool, but the kiss was filled with a warmth that spread through her entire being. She felt the tether between them pulse with shared emotion. His surprise, his joy, her certainty, her hope. When they broke apart, she was smiling. Eternity and complete financial security, she said, her voice light but her eyes serious. You drive a hard bargain, Lord Valerius. Her smile widened. I accept. Both. But I have conditions. Name them, he said immediately. First, you have to tell me when you're doing the psychic suggestion thing on other people. I don't want to be an accessory to vampire mind crimes. Agreed. Second, Alistair has to teach me about the Medici gold. That sounds like a fascinating story. He will be delighted. He has been looking for someone to complain to about the Florentine banking cartels. And third, Emma said, her smile turning mischievous, you have to come to at least one of my work presentations and pretend to be interested in ergonomic office chair market analytics. Valerius looked at her with such profound fondness that she felt it through the tether like a physical embrace. Emma, I have spent the last month genuinely fascinated by your thoughts on lumbar support. That will require no pretense whatsoever. She laughed and kissed him again. For the first time, the tether between them transmitted not anxiety, not confusion, not even joy, but a deep, resonant, and mutual sense of peace. The Vampire King had come for a soul and had found something infinitely more valuable. He had found his quiet. Emma woke up the next morning on her couch, wrapped in what appeared to be a very expensive blanket she definitely didn't own. Valerius was sitting in her armchair, which was comically too small for his imposing frame, reading one of her fantasy novels. He looked deeply uncomfortable in the cheap IKEA furniture, but he was still there. "Okay," Emma said, sitting up. "So, last night wasn't a dream." "I'm afraid not," Valerius said, carefully marking his page. "And I agreed to eternity with a vampire." "You may, of course, reconsider in the clear light of day," he offered, though she felt a tremor of anxiety from him through the tether. It was strange and oddly endearing to feel him worry. Emma was silent, thinking. Through the tether, Valerius felt her mental process. A new spreadsheet was being constructed. Pros and cons. Immortality versus losing her mortality. Never worrying about retirement versus living forever. Dating a literal monster versus dating another man who describes himself as fiscally conservative on dating apps and thinks a nice date is splitting a check at Applebee's. "Question," Emma said finally. "Do vampires get sick? Ever?" "No," Valerius confirmed. "No health insurance premiums. Ever." "Correct." "I'm in. That alone seals the deal." Valerius felt a wave of relief so profound it surprised him. "You're certain?" "Valerius, you've been in my head for weeks. You know exactly how certain I am. You can literally feel it." She gestured at the space between them. "This is the least anxious I've been about a major life decision in my entire adult life." It was true. Through the tether, he felt only calm certainty from her, with just a small flutter of excited nervousness that felt more like anticipation than fear. "Besides," Emma added, standing and stretching, "I finally understand why you were so weird about the PowerPoint that first day. You weren't stalking me, you were just suffering through my work anxiety in real time." "It was educational," Valerius said diplomatically. "You're going to have to get used to Brenda," Emma warned. "She's not going away. Next week I have a meeting with her about Q4 projections, and she's going to have opinions about my font choices." "I have commanded armies and negotiated with elder gods," Valerius said seriously. "I believe I can withstand Brenda from marketing." "Oh, you sweet summer vampire," Emma said, grinning. "You have no idea." 6 months later, Valerius stood in the back of a corporate conference room, wearing a visitor badge that said, "Guest of Emma Collins," in cheerful sans serif font. He watched Emma present her quarterly market analysis with the same intensity he once reserved for battle strategy. Through the tether, he felt her nervous energy, the little spike of anxiety when her laptop briefly froze, the surge of satisfaction when someone nodded at her data visualization. Brenda, a sharp-eyed woman with aggressively highlighted hair, interrupted twice to question Emma's font choices. Valerius felt Emma's irritation and had to suppress the urge to psychically suggest that Brenda develop a sudden appreciation for Calibri. Emma had been very clear about the rules. After the presentation, as people filed out, Brenda approached them. "Emma, your +1 seems very attentive," she said, eyeing Valerius with obvious suspicion. "Is he in marketing?" "Asset management," Valerius said smoothly. "Generational wealth preservation." Brenda said, clearly trying to find fault and coming up empty. "Well, good presentation, Emma, though I still think the header font could have been bolder." As she walked away, Emma turned to Valerius, trying not to laugh. "You wanted to do the thing to her, didn't you?" "I have no idea what you're referring to," Valerius said with perfect composure, though she felt his amusement through the tether. "You wanted to psychically suggest that she loves my font choices." "The thought never crossed my mind." "Liar." She took his hand, lacing her cool fingers through hers. Even after months, the temperature difference still startled her. Thank you for coming. I know this is possibly the most boring thing you've experienced in 2,000 years. On the contrary, Valerius said seriously, I found your breakdown of the Q3 sales trends in the Northeast region genuinely compelling. The correlation between ergonomic features and price sensitivity was particularly insightful. Emma stared at him. Through the tether, she felt only complete sincerity. You're not joking. I never joke about market analytics, he said, and she felt his affection wash over her like a warm wave. Besides, I have spent months experiencing your thoughts about lumbar support. I am possibly the world's foremost expert on your theories about office furniture. I could write a dissertation. That's the most romantic thing anyone has ever said to me, Emma said, and she meant it. They left the office building together, stepping out into the evening air. Emma's anxiety about the presentation was already fading, replaced by the pleasant tiredness of a job well done and the anticipation of dinner. Real dinner, not the sad desk lunch she used to eat while refreshing her loan payment portal. So, Valerius said as they walked toward his car, a sleek black thing that looked like it cost more than her former student debt. Have you given any more thought to the timing? They'd been discussing it for months. The turning. Emma had wanted to wait, to finish a few more things on her very human to-do list. Get the crown, cash out the 401k properly, have Thanksgiving with her family one more time. Tell her sister the truth, which had been its own adventure involving a lot of wine and even more laughter. Actually, Emma said, I was thinking, maybe soon? I finished the dental work. The 401k thing is sorted. Alistair found a loophole involving estate planning that even the IRS can't argue with. And I told my mom last week. How did that conversation proceed? Valerius asked carefully. He'd been very anxious about the family revelations. She asked if you were treating me well and if you had a good job. When I said you were independently wealthy and owned multiple properties, she told me to lock it down immediately and asked when the wedding was. Emma grinned. The vampire thing was honestly secondary to her concerns about me being single at 32. Valerius stopped walking, turning to face her with an expression of such vulnerability that it made her heart ache. Are you certain, Emma? This cannot be undone. You would be giving up the sun and aging and dental insurance premiums and student loan interest and the fear that I'll end up homeless if I get sick, Emma finished. Yes, Valerius, I'm certain. I've been certain for a while now. Through the tether, he felt the absolute truth of her words. No anxiety, no doubt. Just calm, confident certainty. Besides, she added, squeezing his hand, someone needs to make sure you don't spend another 2,000 years without understanding the joy of a good parking spot. That's a quality of life issue. You are extraordinary, he said softly. I am anxious and practical and deeply weird about money, Emma corrected. But apparently that's your type. Apparently so, Valerius agreed, and kissed her as the streetlights flickered on around them. For the first time in millennia, the ancient vampire had found something worth more than power, more than immortality, more than dominion over the darkness. He had found someone who understood that sometimes the most terrifying monsters weren't the ones that lurked in shadows, but the ones that arrived in the form of medical bills and compounding interest. And together, they had defeated them all. The Vampire King had come for a soul and had found something infinitely more valuable. He had found his quiet. And Emma had found something she'd never expected. A partner who had literally experienced her worst anxieties and hadn't run away, but had instead paid off her student loans and learned to care deeply about ergonomic office furniture. In the end, the prophecy had been right. Emma's bloodline did hold immense power. It just wasn't the kind that could be stolen or bound by dark rituals. It was the power to survive, to function, to somehow find humor and hope while juggling 17 different catastrophic scenarios at once. It was the power to transform a predator into a protector, to turn attempted conquest into genuine partnership, to make an immortal being understand that sometimes the greatest magic was simply not having to worry about a 401k anymore. After 2 weeks of careful preparation and one very strange conversation with Alistair about the logistics of faking her death for insurance purposes, "It's technically fraud, my lord, but I've done worse for the Borgias," Emma Collins became something more than human. The transformation happened in Valerius's castle, in a room he'd prepared carefully, filled with soft blankets and low lighting and every comfort he could think of. He'd been terrified, though he tried to hide it. She felt it anyway, through the tether. "I have done this only twice before," he admitted as they stood together in the quiet room. "Both times, centuries ago. Both were warriors who sought immortality for power. You are seeking it for dental benefits and peace of mind." "And you," Emma added. "Don't forget that part." "And me," he agreed softly. The process was less dramatic than she'd expected from movies. There was no thunder, no mystical ceremony. Just Valerius, holding her carefully, his fangs sharp against her throat, and a moment of bright pain, followed by a spreading cold that felt almost peaceful. As her human life drained away and something new rushed in to fill the void, Emma felt the tether between them transform. It had been a thin, silvery thread, a psychic accident born of a failed ritual. Now it blazed like a golden cord, a true bond forged not by magic, but by choice. She felt everything he felt, his fear, his hope, his overwhelming love. And he felt her trust, her certainty, her slightly hysterical inner monologue that even near death couldn't fully suppress. "This is either the best decision I've ever made or the worst, but at least I won't have to worry about retirement anymore." Oh God, is that what dying feels like? That's not so bad. I wonder if I can still drink coffee as a vampire. That's going to be a deal breaker if I can't. "You can still drink coffee," Valerius murmured against her throat, and she would have laughed if she'd had the breath. When it was over, she lay in his arms, feeling fundamentally different. Stronger. Clearer. The constant background hum of human anxiety about money, about health, about the future, had simply vanished. Not because she'd stopped caring, but because the things that could hurt her had changed. "How do you feel?" Valerius asked, brushing hair back from her face. Emma considered. Through their bond, she felt his nervous anticipation. "Hungry," she said finally. "And like I want to fight Brenda from marketing. Is that normal?" "The hunger is normal. The urge to fight your coworker may be uniquely yours." "Also," Emma added, sitting up with a speed that startled them both, "I can see in the dark. Like, really see. Your castle is actually kind of beautiful. I couldn't tell before because it was always so dim." Valerius felt a burst of pride through their bond. "I'm glad you think so. You'll be living here now, after all." "About that," Emma said, "I have thoughts. Decorating thoughts. This place needs color, Valerius. Maybe some throw pillows. Definitely some lamps, even if we don't technically need them anymore. And the dungeon, the armory. The armory could use some serious organizing. I'm thinking labeled bins, and maybe a spreadsheet system for inventory." Through their bond, Valerius felt her excitement, her plans, her unstoppable need to optimize and organize his centuries of accumulated chaos. Instead of dread, he felt only affection. "You're going to reorganize my entire castle, aren't you?" he asked. "I'm going to reorganize your entire life," Emma corrected. "You have literally never filed anything properly. I saw the scrolls in your library. The filing system is chronological by acquisition. That's chaos, Valerius. Pure chaos. I have existed for 2,000 years using that system." "And now you have me," Emma said, kissing him. "Congratulations. You're about to discover the joy of proper alphabetization. 1 year later, the castle had throw pillows, and lamps, and a comprehensive inventory system for the armory that Alistair admitted, grudgingly, had saved him considerable time. Valerius's council had been surprised by the changes in their sovereign. He smiled now. He laughed. He sometimes left meetings early with vague excuses about prior commitments that everyone understood meant, Emma wants to show me something. But he was also more effective than he'd been in centuries. The constant, low-level distraction of the unstable tether was gone, replaced by a true partnership bond. Emma's strategic thinking, honed by years of navigating corporate bureaucracy and stretching inadequate budgets, proved surprisingly applicable to vampire politics. "You're approaching this wrong," she'd told him during one particularly tedious territorial dispute with a vampire lord from the Mediterranean. "He doesn't want your territory, he wants respect. He's been ruling the same region for 600 years, and you've never once acknowledged his infrastructure improvements. Send him a formal commendation, make it public, he'll back down." Valerius had been skeptical, but he'd tried it. The dispute had ended within a week, with the Mediterranean lord so flattered that he'd sent a gift basket of premium blood vintages and a thank-you note. "How did you know that would work?" Valerius had asked. "Because he reminded me of Dave from my old accounting department," Emma had explained. "Dave didn't actually want a promotion, he just wanted someone to notice he'd reorganized the filing system. It's always about recognition." The other vampires found Emma fascinating and slightly terrifying. She had no patience for centuries-old grudges or elaborate political theater. She'd once ended a 3-hour council debate by saying, "This is ridiculous. You're arguing about a border that neither of you actually uses. Just agree to joint custody and move on. I have things to do." The border dispute had been resolved in 15 minutes. But the strangest thing, the thing that surprised even Valerius, was how happy he was. For 2,000 years, he had been collecting power, wealth, knowledge, filling an emptiness he'd barely acknowledged. Now that emptiness was gone, replaced by something as simple and profound as Emma's presence. She still made spreadsheets, now for cataloging ancient artifacts and planning their travels. She still worried about things, though now it was whether the blood vintages were being stored at the right temperature, or if they'd remembered to send Alistair on vacation. He'd never taken one in 500 years. Emma had been horrified. And sometimes, late at night, they would sit in their library now, with Emma's books mixed among his ancient tomes, and she would tell him about her day. "I reorganized the scroll collection by language family," she'd say, "and I found 3 you'd misdated by at least a century. Also, we're hosting a dinner party next month. I invited your council and their partners. It's going to be awkward and weird, and we're doing it anyway because you need to socialize more." And Valerius, who had once commanded armies and conquered kingdoms, would listen to her plans for seating arrangements and menu selection with the same intensity he'd once reserved for battle strategy. Because this was his life now. This was what the prophecy had really meant. Emma's power wasn't something to be taken, it was something to be shared. It was the power to transform darkness into light, isolation into partnership, endless existence into actual life. The prophecy had said her bloodline held the key to absolute power, and it had been right. The power wasn't in her anxiety or her bloodline magic. It was in her humanity, her resilience, her ability to find humor and hope in the darkest circumstances. It was the power to make an ancient monster remember what it felt like to care about something beyond himself. "What are you thinking about?" Emma asked one evening, catching him watching her with an expression of wonder. "You," Valerius said simply, "and how a ritual failure became the greatest success of my very long life." "That's very sweet," Emma said. "But also you're procrastinating. We have that dinner party in 3 days and you promised to help me figure out the seating chart. Claudius and Malachor cannot sit next to each other, Valerius. Not after the incident with the blood wine. The incident was centuries ago. I don't care. They're sitting at opposite ends of the table. Through their bond, Valerius felt her determination, her affection, her slightly manic energy about the dinner party. He also felt her underlying contentment, the deep peace that came from a life free from the anxieties that had once consumed her. "As you wish," he said, pulling her into his lap, "though I maintain that you worry too much about vampire table politics." "Someone has to," Emma said. "Left to your own devices, you'd seat people by age, and that's just asking for trouble." She kissed him, and through their bond, they shared a moment of perfect understanding. They had both been alone, in different ways. He in his immortal isolation, she in her grinding anxiety. And they had found each other by accident, through a failed ritual and a magical mishap, and the sheer stubborn resilience of her student loan-battered psyche. It wasn't the grand epic love story that bards would sing about. It was weirder and funnier and more mundane than that. It was a story about how sometimes the greatest magic is just finding someone who sees your worst and decides to stay anyway. Someone who will literally experience your panic about expired car registration and still think you're worth choosing. Someone who will pay off your student loans just to get some peace and quiet, then realize they never want to be quiet without you again. The Vampire King had sought ultimate power and found something better. He found Emma. And Emma, who had spent so long drowning in anxiety and debt, found something she'd never thought possible. Someone who understood completely and loved her anyway. In the end, the prophecy had been fulfilled, just not the way anyone expected. Emma's bloodline did hold the key to absolute power. It was just that the power was love, partnership, and the profound magic of finding someone who thinks your neurotic spreadsheets are charming rather than exhausting. Also, no student loan debt. That part was pretty magical too.